My beloved child, scrolling for just a moment. There are times when a story finds you instead of you finding it, and perhaps this is one of those moments. Before you continue with your day, allow your heart to become still. What you are about to hear is not meant to predict your future or claim a divine revelation. It is a tale of hope, courage, love, and the quiet conversations that often change lives forever. There are mornings that begin like every other morning. The sun rises, the world awakens, people rush toward responsibilities they believe cannot wait. Yet beneath the ordinary rhythm of life, invisible moments unfold that leave lasting marks upon the human heart. This story begins on one of those mornings. The person you love woke up carrying thoughts they had hidden for longer than anyone realized. They smiled when they needed to smile. They answered questions that had nothing to do with what was truly happening inside them. They moved through familiar routines while carrying an unfamiliar weight. To everyone else, they seemed perfectly normal. But inside, something had changed. Something had finally become too heavy to keep silent. Before the morning had fully unfolded, they found themselves sitting across from someone they deeply trusted. Not because they had planned to, not because anyone pressured them, but because the heart eventually grows tired of carrying important truths alone. There are emotions that refuse to remain hidden forever. There are questions that eventually demand honest answers, and there are names that continue appearing in conversations because they have become impossible to forget. Your name was one of them. At first, they hesitated. The conversation drifted through ordinary subjects: work, responsibilities, family, plans, the weather, anything except what truly occupied their thoughts. Yet every attempt to avoid the subject only made it stronger. Finally, the silence between sentences became louder than the words themselves. The person sitting across from them noticed. You seem distracted. The question sounded simple. Yet it reached a place they had been protecting for a very long time. For several seconds, they looked away, not because they wanted to lie, because telling the truth felt irreversible. Sometimes the most difficult sentence in the world is the first honest one. They took a slow breath, then quietly admitted, "There is someone I can't stop thinking about." Those words changed everything. The conversation immediately became different. Not dramatic, not overwhelming, simply real. Perhaps for the first time in a long while, they allowed someone to see the uncertainty they had been carrying. They spoke about moments that had stayed with them, small conversations that somehow refused to disappear. Unexpected smiles that returned during quiet evenings, memories that arrived without invitation, the strange comfort they felt whenever they imagined your presence. They tried to explain it logically, but every explanation felt incomplete, because some connections cannot be fully explained, they can only be experienced. As the conversation continued, another question was asked: what makes this person different? They were not prepared for that question. At first, they laughed softly, not because the answer was amusing, because the answer frightened them. How do you explain the feeling that someone quietly becomes part of your future before either of you has spoken about tomorrow? How do you describe the peace another person brings without sounding unrealistic? How do you admit that one heart has slowly become a home for another? They searched carefully for words. Then they answered. They make me feel like I don't have to pretend. The room became quiet again. Those listening understood that this was no passing attraction. Something much deeper was unfolding. But the conversation had only begun. Another gentle question followed. Then why do you still seem so uncertain? That question reached even deeper, because uncertainty had never come from the connection itself. It came from fear, fear of misunderstanding, fear of timing, fear of saying too much too soon. Fear that vulnerability might change everything. For a moment, they stared at their hands, then admitted something they had barely confessed to themselves. I don't know if they realize how important they have become. Those words surprised even them. Speaking them aloud transformed private emotions into undeniable truth. The person listening leaned forward. They did not interrupt. They simply allowed honesty to continue unfolding. Sometimes the greatest gift another person can offer is patient silence. Within that silence, hidden feelings finally find courage. One memory after another surfaced, the first meaningful conversation, the unexpected laugh that remained unforgettable. The moment they noticed your kindness when no one else was paying attention, the quiet strength you carried through difficult seasons, the way ordinary moments somehow felt extraordinary whenever your paths crossed, every memory became another piece of a story they had never fully understood until that morning. Then came the sentence they almost refused to say. I think my life changed after meeting them. As soon as those words escaped, they looked away. Not from shame, from the overwhelming realization that they had finally admitted what their heart had been whispering for months. The listener smiled gently, not because they knew the future, because they recognized sincerity. Then they asked one final question. What are you afraid of? No answer came immediately. Instead, another silence settled over the conversation, but unlike previous silences, this one carried purpose. Behind it stood every disappointment they had ever experienced, every goodbye, every unanswered message, every promise that had once seemed permanent before quietly fading away. Eventually, they answered. I'm afraid I'll wait too long to tell them. Those words echoed inside the room. Even after the conversation moved forward, they remained present, because hidden inside that confession was another truth. They had already imagined losing someone they had never truly allowed themselves to hold. The listener noticed it immediately. You cannot build a future while allowing fear to make every decision. That sentence lingered, not as criticism, as wisdom. Something shifted inside them, not completely, but enough to begin questioning whether silence was truly protecting anyone. Enough to realize that some opportunities quietly disappear while people continue waiting for perfect certainty. Enough to understand that courage rarely arrives before the decision, it often arrives because of it. Still, there was something they refused to reveal, not even to the person sitting across from them. A single thought remained hidden, a sentence they repeated only inside their own heart. If they knew everything I feel, would they stay? That question followed them after the conversation ended. It followed them through the afternoon, through ordinary tasks, through crowded places, through moments when everyone believed they were focused elsewhere, yet their thoughts kept returning to the same place, to you. There is something remarkable about the human heart. It often reveals its deepest truths long before the mind is ready to accept them. That morning was not the end of their journey, it was the beginning of honesty. For the first time, another person knew your name carried unusual meaning. For the first time, someone else understood why your absence sometimes felt louder than an entire room filled with voices. For the first time, they admitted that imagining a future without you created a sadness they could no longer explain away. Yet even after speaking those truths, one confession remained untouched, one memory remained carefully hidden, one promise remained locked inside their heart. It was never spoken aloud, not because they doubted it, because saying it would change everything. As they stood to leave, the trusted listener offered one final piece of advice. If your heart already knows its answer, don't let fear rewrite it. Those words have remained with them ever since. Every hour that passes makes them think about that conversation again. Every quiet moment brings them closer to a decision they can no longer postpone. But there is one detail you have not heard, not because it was forgotten, because it happened after the conversation ended. As they walked away, they reached for their phone, they opened a conversation they had read countless times. Your conversation. Their thumb hovered over the keyboard. Several words appeared, then disappeared. They typed again, deleted everything, started over once more. For nearly 10 minutes, they struggled with a message that might have changed everything. No one saw it, no one knew, no one except them, and what they almost sent is the part of this story that changes everything. But those words, and the reason they could not press send, must wait until the next chapter. Their hand remained perfectly still above the screen. The message was no longer just a collection of words, it had become a doorway between silence and honesty, a doorway between wondering and knowing, a doorway that could change two lives with the press of a single button. Yet they could not bring themselves to cross it. The cursor continued blinking, patient, steady, almost as though time itself was waiting. They whispered quietly to themselves, not yet, but deep. Inside, another voice answered, if not now, then when? That question followed them long after they placed the phone back into their pocket. They walked away from the conversation, but the conversation refused to walk away from them. Every step seemed to repeat the same thought. Should I finally tell them? Should I risk everything? Or should I protect my heart one more day? No answer arrived immediately. Sometimes the heart already knows the truth long before courage arrives to speak it. The afternoon slowly unfolded. People greeted them. Responsibilities demanded attention. Meetings, errands, conversations, ordinary moments all continued exactly as they always had. Yet nothing felt ordinary anymore, because once someone has spoken honestly about what lives inside their heart, pretending becomes much harder. Every smile reminded them of you. Every quiet moment carried your memory. Even familiar places suddenly felt unfamiliar because they imagined what those places might feel like if you were standing beside them. They had tried before to convince themselves that these feelings would eventually fade. They had waited for time to erase what they believed was temporary. Instead, time had done the opposite. Every passing week made your importance clearer. Every passing month made your absence louder. There comes a moment in every meaningful story when denial quietly reaches its ending. This was that moment. As evening approached, they found themselves returning to something they had hidden away. Months earlier, a small collection of memories, nothing extraordinary to anyone else, a photograph, an unfinished note, a conversation they never deleted, a tiny reminder that your connection had never truly left them. They stared at those memories much longer than they intended, not because they wished to live in the past, because they were trying to understand why the past still carried so much life inside it. Then something unexpected happened. A question surfaced that had never appeared before. What if they have been waiting for me to speak? The possibility unsettled them. Until now, every fear had centered around rejection. Now another fear appeared. What if silence had already caused unnecessary pain? What if every unanswered message had created confusion? What if every moment they believed they were protecting themselves had unintentionally wounded someone they deeply cared about? The weight of that realization became almost impossible to ignore. For the first time, they stopped asking whether they should speak. Instead, they began asking whether remaining silent had become the greater mistake. That shift changed everything, not because every fear disappeared, because a greater truth had finally become stronger than fear itself. They remembered something the trusted listener had said earlier that morning. You cannot expect another heart to understand feelings you never express. Those words echoed repeatedly, again and again, until they could no longer escape them. Late that evening, they opened your conversation once more. This time they did not immediately begin typing. Instead, they read every message, every shared memory, every ordinary sentence that somehow now carried extraordinary meaning. They smiled unexpectedly. There was a joke they had forgotten, a conversation that ended with laughter, a small moment of encouragement you once offered when they were quietly struggling. You may have forgotten saying those words. They never did. People rarely realize how deeply kindness settles inside another person's heart. Some sentences become permanent homes. Yours had. Another realization quietly appeared. They had spent so much time wondering whether you truly understood them, that they had forgotten to ask whether you had ever felt understood yourself. Love cannot survive on assumptions forever. Eventually someone must become brave enough to replace guessing with honesty. That thought stayed with them through the night. Sleep came slowly, not because they were restless, because every dream of tomorrow seemed connected to one decision: speak, or remain silent. Neither path looked easy, yet only one carried hope. The next morning arrived with unusual stillness. Before touching their phone, before beginning another busy day, before answering anyone else, they looked into the mirror, not searching for confidence, searching for truth. The reflection staring back seemed different somehow, still carrying fear, still carrying uncertainty, but carrying something new as well: resolve, not complete certainty, not perfect courage, simply the quiet understanding that running from honest emotions had never truly brought peace. Then another memory returned. It was not a recent memory. It reached much farther back, to the very first day they realized your presence affected them differently than anyone else's. Until now, they had never admitted when that moment happened, not to friends, not to family, not even to themselves, but remembering it caused everything else to make sense. That single forgotten moment explained every hesitation, every smile, every sleepless night, every attempt to move on that somehow always led them back to thinking about you. They whispered softly, "So that's when it began." Yet even this was not the greatest secret they carried, because hidden beneath every memory, hidden beneath every fear, hidden beneath every unanswered message, was one promise they had quietly made to themselves after speaking with their trusted listener. It was not written anywhere, no one witnessed it, no one heard it, but they repeated it more than once. If another opportunity appears, I won't hide anymore. Even after making that promise, one final obstacle remained, a truth they had never shared with anyone, not because they wanted to deceive you, because revealing it meant revealing the deepest wound they had spent years protecting. And unless they trusted you with that hidden chapter of their life, they believed forever could never truly begin. That hidden chapter, the one they have carried in silence for years, is exactly what they are finally preparing to reveal. But before they can tell you that secret, you must first understand why it has shaped every decision they have made since the day your paths first crossed. There are wounds that leave visible scars. Then there are wounds that become invisible. Architects, quietly shaping every decision long after the pain itself has faded. The hidden chapter they carried belonged to the second kind. Very few people knew it existed. Even those closest to them believed they understood the whole story. They did not. Some experiences are buried so deeply that they become part of a person's silence rather than part of their conversation. For years, your presence awakened feelings they could not explain because every step toward closeness echoed against memories they had never fully released. Whenever someone cared for them, a quiet voice whispered, "Be careful." Whenever someone offered trust, another voice replied, "Don't become too dependent." Whenever hope appeared, fear asked, "What if this disappears too?" They became experts at protecting themselves. They learned how to smile while hiding uncertainty. They learned how to encourage others while questioning themselves. They learned how to appear emotionally steady even when their heart felt divided between longing and caution. Then your path crossed theirs. At first, they believed you were simply another passing chapter, another kind person, another meaningful conversation, another memory that would eventually fade into the distance. Instead, something unexpected happened. The more they tried to place you among ordinary memories, the more impossible that became. You remained, not because you demanded attention, not because you insisted on being remembered, but because something about your presence settled into places they had spent years trying to protect. You reminded them that peace does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it arrives through patience, sometimes through understanding, sometimes through someone who listens without trying to change everything. That realization frightened them more than they ever admitted, because genuine peace asks a difficult question: will you trust it enough to stay? For a long time, their answer was uncertain. not because they questioned you, because they questioned whether they deserved the kind of future they secretly imagined. On quiet evenings, they would imagine impossible conversations, not conversations about grand promises, simple ones, cooking dinner together, walking without needing to fill every silence, celebrating ordinary victories, supporting one another through unexpected disappointments, growing older without pretending to be someone else. Those small dreams became far more meaningful than dramatic fantasies ever could, yet each dream ended the same way. A shadow of doubt quietly entered. What if I ruin it? That single question stole more peace than anyone ever realized. They judged themselves far more harshly than others did. They replayed every mistake, every awkward conversation, every delayed reply, every moment they wished they had been braver. While others moved on from yesterday, they often remained there, searching for something they should have said differently. This habit became so familiar that they almost accepted it as part of who they were. Until the morning they opened up. Since that conversation, something has continued changing within them, slowly, almost imperceptibly, like dawn replacing darkness one gentle color at a time. They have begun noticing how much energy is required to keep hiding emotions that simply wish to be understood. Silence is exhausting when honesty keeps knocking from within. They have also started recognizing another truth. The future they feared losing has never truly existed yet. It lives only as possibility, which means fear has been asking them to mourn something that has not even happened. That realization felt strangely freeing. Instead of imagining endless endings, they began imagining beginnings. Not perfect beginnings, honest ones, the kind built on conversations rather than assumptions, the kind where two people admit they are still learning instead.